My name is Donna Roswell. I was 31 years old, walking down Route 11 with a swollen knee and my 11-month-old daughter on my hip when my dad's truck pulled up beside me. My mother-in-law had taken my car 6 months earlier. My husband had taken my phone that morning, and for half a year, the woman who claimed to love my daughter like her own had been quietly assembling a legal petition to take Lily away from me. She had a family doctor willing to call me unstable. She had my car title locked in her desk. She had church friends who believed every word she said. She didn't know I'd been keeping records of my own. 52 entries, clinical format, dated and signed. What happened at that courthouse the next morning made every person in the gallery go silent. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is the channel where ordinary women face extraordinary betrayals and win through patience, principle, and paperwork. If you've ever been told you should be grateful for the bare minimum, this one's for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I know what you might be thinking. Why didn't she just leave? Stay with me. Because by the time I understood what was happening, leaving wasn't the hard part. The hard part was leaving with my daughter. And that took planning. I should start at the beginning. My mother, Ruth Caldwell, died of ovarian cancer when I was 14. One Tuesday, she was braiding my hair before school. 6 months later, I was standing at her grave holding my little brother Tyler's hand, and he was 10 and asking me when Mom was coming back. My father, Ray Caldwell, was the county sheriff. He worked doubles. He grieved in his truck before he walked in the door. So I cooked dinner. I packed Tyler's lunches. I learned how to sign permission slips and check homework and keep the house quiet enough that when Dad finally sat down at the kitchen table at 9:00, he could close his eyes for a second without worrying. That's where it started. The thing my therapist would later call over-responsibility. The belief that if I just worked hard enough, stayed organized enough, anticipated every need before it became a crisis, I could hold anything together. I graduated high school with a 3.88 and a scholarship to the nursing program at Blue Ridge Community College. By 23, I had my RN license. By 25, I was working the medical surgical floor at Shenandoah Valley Community Hospital, pulling 12-hour shifts and coming home to a clean apartment and a budget spreadsheet taped to my refrigerator. I met Anthony Roberts at the hardware store on a Saturday in March. I was buying primer to repaint Dad's guest bathroom. He was restocking PVC elbows for a plumbing job. He had calloused hands and an easy laugh, and he carried my paint cans to the car without being asked. He felt like home, the kind you build from scratch, not the kind you inherit. He never talked about his father. I should have asked why, but I was 27 and I had a degree, a steady paycheck, and a dad who had taught me to check the oil before I checked the weather. I thought I knew what a good man looked like. Anthony brought me to meet his mother on a Sunday afternoon in April. The house sat at the end of a gravel road outside Woodstock. 2 stories, white siding, green shutters, a porch swing that didn't swing because the chains were locked. Lorraine Roberts opened the door before we knocked. She was 60, silver hair pinned tight, a dish towel folded over her shoulder like a uniform. The kitchen smelled like bleach, not the clean kind that means someone mopped the floor. The kind that means someone scrubbed until the surface forgot what was there before. She had assigned seats. She told Anthony where to sit, handed me a glass of water without asking if I wanted one, and said grace. Before I had my napkin unfolded, Belle, Anani's younger sister, sat in the corner chair with her phone in her lap. She was 26 then. She watched me the way a security camera watches a hallway, steady and without blinking. Lorraine asked about my work. She knew the name of my nursing program, the name of my supervisor, my hourly rate. Anthony Mustave told her everything. She smiled at me over the mashed potatoes and said, "It's so nice Anthony finally brought home someone useful. I offered to help wash the dishes afterward." Lorraine set her hand on my wrist. Light pressure but precise, like a blood pressure cuff clicking into place. "Oh, honey," she said, "you don't need to do that. You should be grateful we welcome you here." She said it sweetly. She said it smiling, and I heard it the way you hear a smoke detector in someone else's house. distant and not yet your problem. I should have paid closer attention. She said, "Welcome the way a landlord says lease." We married the following October. I was 28. The ceremony was small, a country church. Dad walking me down the aisle, Tyler reading a poem, 40 guests. Lorraine sat in the front row and cried. I thought it was joy. Anthony suggested we move into his mother's house. Just until we save for a down payment, he said. 6 months tops. I did the math. His plumbing income plus my nursing salary minus rent at El Rain, we could save $12,000 in 6 months. It made sense. The first 3 months were fine. Lorraine cooked. She did laundry. She kept the downstairs spotless and brought fresh towels to our room on the second floor without being asked. I told myself this was generosity. Then small things shifted. My car key disappeared from the brass rooster hook by the front door. A little painted rooster, beak open, tail up, one empty hook where my key used to hang. Lorraine said she moved it to the kitchen junk drawer for safekeeping. The next week it moved to Lorraine's purse. The week after that, I stopped asking. She drove me where I needed to go, or Anthony did. She said it saved gas. She suggested I put my paycheck into a joint household account so we can manage expenses together. Anthony agreed before I had a chance to answer. I said I wanted to keep my own account. Anthony looked at Lorraine. Lorraine looked at me. "Of course, honey," she said, "if that's what you need." That night, Anthony told me I'd embarrassed his mother in front of the family. I apologized. I tried to open my own checking account online that week. The nearest bank branch was 8 miles away, and I no longer had a car to get there. Dad came to visit on a Saturday in December. Lorraine had the house ready. Fresh cookies on the counter, Christmas candles lit, Donna in a new sweater Lorraine had picked out from the Goodwill rack. The house smelled like cinnamon instead of bleach. The only time I ever noticed that switch, Lorraine greeted Dad at the door like an old friend, even though they had met twice. She poured him coffee in a mug she'd chosen for him. She controlled the seating. The conversation, the temperature of the room, I wanted to tell him. I sat across from my father with my hands around a mug I hadn't picked out, wearing a sweater I hadn't bought, in a chair I hadn't chosen, and I wanted to say, "Dad, something's wrong." But Lorraine didn't leave the room. She refilled his coffee before Theckup was half empty. She redirected every pause with a question about the county or the weather or whether Ray had started ice fishing yet. Dad looked at me over his mug. "You look tired, Donnable." My childhood name. He used it when he was worried. "I'm fine, Dad, just adjusting." He looked at the driveway. "Where's your car?" Lorraine answered before I could. "Oh, Anani's been driving her, saves gas." Dad looked at me. I nodded. He didn't push. That was Dad's way. He respected boundaries even when the boundary was a locked door. On the porch steps, he hugged me and said one thing. "You know my number, you call anytime." He paused. "Anytime means 3:00 in the morning, too." I watched his truck pull away down the gravel road. The tailgate shrank until it disappeared past the tree line. I went back inside. Lorraine was already washing his mug. By February, I was pregnant. Morning sickness kept me on the bathroom floor for weeks. Lorraine brought me ginger tea and crackers. She rubbed my back. She said, "A mother's place is with her child. The hospital can wait." I told her I wanted to work through the second trimester. Anthony shook his head at dinner. "Mom knows best." She raised me right. He said it the way someone quotes a bumper sticker, like the words had been printed on him so long ago, he didn't notice the adhesive anymore. Lorraine called my supervisor at the hospital. She told them I was taking medical leave. She didn't ask me. She didn't tell me she'd done it until a week later when I mentioned picking up a shift, and she said, "Oh, honey, I already spoke with Nancy. She understands." I felt my chest tighten. I opened my mouth. I closed it because Belle was sitting at the kitchen table, and I had noticed something 2 days earlier. My phone's battery was draining in 4 hours instead of 12. I knew what that meant. I worked in a hospital where nurses tracked medication dispensing software on their devices. I knew what a background GPS app looked like in the battery usage panel. I checked there. It was an app I hadn't installed running location services around the clock. I confronted the next morning. She blinked. "I don't know what you're talking about." I went to Lorraine. Lorraine tilted her head. "Honey, Are you sure you're not being a little paranoid? Maybe we should call Dr. Mercer about that postpartum screening. That was when I understood. If I reacted, they'd use it as evidence. So I didn't argue. I said nothing. But this was strategy, not surrender. The next morning, I checked my contacts. Dad's number had been deleted. Lily was born on a Tuesday in August at Shenandoah Valley Community Hospital. 7LB4 Oz. She had my eyes and Anani's chin and a cry that sounded like a question. I held her against my chest and I understood for the first time what the word unconditional actually costs. It costs everything. You'd do anything. You'd stay anywhere. Lorraine arrived in the delivery room 40 minutes after I'd pushed Lily out. She hadn't been called. She came because Belle had texted her from the waiting room. Belle, who had insisted on driving me to the hospital because Anani's on a job. Lorraine picked Lily up before I'd finished the first feeding. She held her like a trophy. My granddaughter, she said to the nurse. Not their daughter, my granddaughter. I tried to call Dad from the hospital phone on the bedside table. Belle was in the chair next to me flipping through a magazine. I dialed the number from memory. The one benefit of it being deleted was that I'd memorized it years ago. Hi, Dad, baby's here. She's perfect. Belle leaned forward. We should let Donna rest. She's exhausted. She took the phone from the cradle, gently smiling. Over the next 6 weeks, Lorraine took over. She decided when Lily ate, when Lily slept, who held Lily, and for how long. She made a feeding chart and taped it to the refrigerator as if Lily were a patient and Lorraine were the charge nurse. I was a registered nurse being told how to care for my own child by a woman who believed Tylenol cured everything. I tried to open a bank account online from Anani's laptop. The site needed a mailing address to verify. Every piece of mail delivered to Lorraine's house was opened by L. Rain before anyone else saw it. Dr. Gregory Mercer arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in October. He was Lorraine's family physician and her friend from church. White hair, soft handshake, a medical bag that looked older than I was. Lorraine told me he was coming to check on the baby. He checked on the baby for about 3 minutes. Then he turned to me. Donna, how have you been feeling? Any trouble sleeping? Crying spells? I recognized the questions. He was running the patient health questionnaire, PHQ-9, a standard depression screening. I'd administered it 100 times on the meds floor, but this version was weaponized. The questions were leading. Do you ever feel disconnected from the baby? Do you find yourself overwhelmed by simple tasks? Lorraine stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching. I answered the way I'd chart my own assessment. My bonding with Lily is excellent. Sleep is disrupted, which is standard for a mother with a 6-week-old infant. I'd rate my distress level at 3 out of 10, which falls within normal parameters. Dr. Mercer blinked. He wasn't used to patients who could read their own charts. Lorraine stepped in. She's very good at hiding it, doctor. You should see her at night. I looked at Lorraine. She looked back. No warmth, pure calculation. Dr. Mercer wrote something in a small notebook, thanked us, and left. I stood at the living room window and watched him get into his car. Lorraine had just added a doctor's notes to whatever file she was building. She wasn't guessing. She was constructing. I scored myself clinically, and Lorraine hadn't expected a patient who could grade her own exam. But I understood something now. The danger wasn't Lorraine's temper. It was her patience. By November, my world had the square footage of a 2-story house and a 4-acre yard. No car, no job, no phone. Belle had accidentally dropped it in the kitchen sink, and Lorraine said they'd replace it when the budget allows. My paychecks, the ones from the months before L. Rain ended my employment, sat in a joint account I couldn't access without Lorraine driving me to the bank and standing beside me at the counter. Dad called the house landline every Sunday afternoon. Lorraine answered. Donna's napping with the baby. I'll tell her you called Ray. She never told me. I found out 3 weeks later when I overheard Anthony mention that Dad had called again. Again, I said. Anthony shrugged. Mom handles the phone. I borrowed Anani's cell one evening while he showered. I texted a former coworker just a line asking if my position was still open. Anthony came out of the bathroom, saw me typing, and his voice went flat. Why are you texting people behind my back? Lorraine appeared at the top of the stairs. "Anthony, honey, I told you she'd do this," she said itchantly, like a prediction confirmed. I put the phone on the table. I said nothing. I walked upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in the room Lorraine had assigned us, and I looked at my hands. They were steady. They were always steady. 12-hour shifts, IV insertions, patient codes. My hands didn't shake, but inside I was doing what I always did, calculating. One more month, I'll convince Anthony to get our own place. I just need the right moment. That night, through the floor vent, I heard Lorraine unlock and open a desk drawer in the study below. Something rustled. Then the drawer closed. The lock clicked. Belle worked on the community the way erosion works on a hillside. Slow, steady, and invisible until the ground gives way. She told the women at church that Donna might have some postpartum issues and doesn't want visitors right now. She told the checkout clerk at the Piggly Wiggly that I was resting at home because the baby's been a lot for her. She called Mrs. Fielding next door to say thank you for the casserole and to mention, almost as an afterthought, that Donna's not really up for company these days. One by one, the people who might have knocked on the door stopped knocking. I overheard Belle on her phone in the basement stairwell one afternoon while Lily napped. I'm worried about her, honestly. She told whoever was on the line. She barely leaves her room. Anthony is doing everything. I stood in the hallway with a burp cloth over my shoulder and listened to someone describe my life in a version I didn't recognize. I found Belle in the kitchen that evening and confronted her quietly, leaning against the counter so Lorraine wouldn't hear. "Why are you telling people I'm struggling?" Belle smiled. She actually smiled. The kind that starts at the mouth and never reaches the eyes. "I'm just looking out for you, sis. We're family." 2 days later, I discovered something on Lorraine's phone while she'd left it charging in the kitchen. Belle had been texting her photographs, photos of me with unwashed hair, dark circles under my eyes, formula stains on my shirt, captions like Tuesday 200 p.m. and Thursday morning, didn't shower again, candid shots taken from doorways. I didn't know were open. They were building a gallery of a woman falling apart. The woman in those photos was exhausted, but she wasn't falling apart. She was being disassembled. I started writing on a Tuesday in December, 7 months after my car key vanished from the brass rooster hook. I used a small spiral notebook. College ruled 70 pages, blue cover. I kept it inside a box of maxi pads under the bathroom sink. Lorraine inventoried the kitchen, the closets, the dresser drawers. She did not inventory feminine hygiene products. I used SOAP format because that is the format I was trained in. Subjective, what the patient reported or stated. Objective, what I observed, measured, or documented. Assessment, my clinical interpretation. Plan next steps. Entry 1. S.L. Roberts stated, "You should be grateful we let you live here." Stated on April 14th during first family dinner. Repeated November 3rd during conflict about phone access. Oh, patient's vehicle confiscated day 1 of cohabitation. Phone access restricted day 47 via tracking application, installed without consent. Employment terminated day 89. Employer contacted by L. Roberts. Informed patient was on medical leave without patient's knowledge or authorization. Bank access restricted joint account patient, unable to withdraw without L. Roberts present. A pattern consistent with coercive control as defined under Virginia Code Section 16.1228. Subsection covering isolation from transportation financial resources and support systems. P. Continue documentation. Seek legal counsel when safe to do so. I sat at the kitchen table writing that first entry while Lorraine scrubbed the counter 4 feet away. The bleach was so strong my eyes watered. She wiped in circles, tight, methodical, the same motion she applied to everything in her house. Control expressed through chemistry, but for the first time since the key disappeared, it didn't flinch at the smell. I was doing something she couldn't wipe away. Sunday at church, Lorraine performed. She carried Lily in a white cotton dress with eyelet trim, an outfit Lorraine had bought without asking me. She held my daughter on her hip, and accepted compliments from women who hadn't seen me in months. Being a grandmother is God's greatest blessing, she told the circle by the coffee urn. Pastor Jim Whitfield squeezed Lorraine's shoulder and called her a wonderful family woman. I stood 3 feet behind her with my hands folded and my mouth closed. After service, a woman named Clara touched my elbow and leaned in. "Are you okay, honey? Lorraine mentioned you've been struggling. I wanted to say she took my car, my phone, my job, and my daughter's feeding schedule, and now she's taking my reputation." Instead, I said, "I'm doing great. Thank you for asking." On the way to the car, Lorraine squeezed my shoulder, the same spot Pastor Jim had squeezed hers. "See," she said, "everyone's so worried about you, Donna. We just want to help." The squeeze was firm, not painful, precise, like a reminder of where the leash attaches. I watched Dr. Mercer approach Lorraine in the parking lot after the service. They spoke for 2 minutes near the handicap sign. Lorraine reached into her purse and handed him a manila envelope. He tucked it under his arm, nodded, and drove away. I buckled Lily into the car seat. Lorraine turned the ignition. Belle sat in the back, typing on her phone. I looked out the passenger window and thought about the locked drawer in the study and the envelope that just changed hands and the notebook under the bathroom sink with 23 entries that nobody in this car knew about. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever sat in a church pew watching someone take credit for the life they were suffocating, you know this feeling. It's not anger. It's clarity. And clarity is the most dangerous thing a woman like Lorraine can give someone like me. Stay with me because what I found in her desk changed everything. Lily's 4-month immunization was the one appointment Elraine allowed without argument. Skipping pediatric vaccinations looks bad to outsiders, and Lorraine never let anything look bad. She drove me to Dr. Patterson's office, parked, and waited in the car with the engine running and the radio on a Christian station. I needed Lily's immunization records, the yellow card they stamp at each visit. Lorraine kept all of Lily's documents in the study desk. For organization, she said the appointment was on a Thursday. Bible study was on Thursday. Lorraine left the house at 9. Anthony was on a job site in Front Real. Belle was in the basement with her headphones on, music loud enough to hear through the floor. I walked into the study. The desk was oak, old, scratched along the edge where someone had dragged a chair too close for 20 years. The center drawer was locked. I already knew where the key was. I had noticed it in October, taped with a small strip off masking tape to the underside of the kitchen junk drawer behind the batteries and the takeout menus. Lorraine taped it there the way people tape spare keys under doormats. It's only hidden from people who aren't looking. I peeled it off, walked back to the study, inserted the key, turned it, pulled the drawer open. Lily's immunization card was on top. That's what I'd come for. But beneath it, in a manila folder with no label, there was something else. I lifted the folder. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside the folder, I found 3 documents. The first was a printed petition for emergency temporary custody of Lily Marie Roberts. Typed on the letterhead of Hargrove and Settle, attorneys at law, Woodstock, Virginia. The grounds were listed in a numbered paragraph. Mother exhibits signs of postpartum psychosis, has refused recommended treatment, and poses a material risk to the health and safety of the minor child. It was unsigned. It was dated 12 days earlier. The second document was my car title. My name, Donna Elizabeth Roswell, printed in the owner line. The title Elraine had told me was at the DMV for a transfer. It had never left this drawer. The third was a letter on Dr. Mercer's office stationery addressed to the Honorable Judge William R. Carson of the Shenandoah County Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. In it, Dr. Mercer summarized his professional concerns regarding my mental health, citing observable signs of emotional instability, detachment from the infant, and resistance to intervention by family members. He was a family physician. He was not a psychiatrist. He was not a psychologist. He did not hold a license to diagnose postpartum psychosis. I read the letter twice. My hands shook, not from fear, from the clinical recognition of what I was looking at. This was not a family that worried about me. This was a case file, and I was the defendant in a trial I didn't know had started. I found an old digital camera in the junk drawer. No tracking app on a camera. I photographed every page. I put the documents back in the exact order I'd found them. I locked the drawer. I returned the key. I taped it back under the junk drawer with the same strip of masking tape. I walked past the empty brass rooster hook on my way upstairs. For 6 months, I had looked at that hook and felt loss. Now I looked at it and felt something different. I was looking at evidence. That night, after Lorraine went to bed and Anani's breathing slowed to the deep rhythm of sleep, I sat on the bathroom floor with the notebook on my knees and wrote entry 31. I documented the custody petition, the car title, and Dr. Mercer's letter. I noted the dates on each document, the letter head, the specific language used. I cross-referenced Dr. Mercer's credentials against the diagnostic claim. Family physician, board certification in general practice, no psychiatric specialty, no authority to diagnose postpartum psychosis under DSM-5 criteria. Letter constitutes a scope of practice concern. My SOAP log now had 47 entries spanning 5.5 months. I needed a lawyer. I could not call one from any phone in this house. The next opportunity was Lily's immunization appointment. The real one, not the pretend well-check Lorraine had staged with Dr. Mercer. At the pediatrician's office the following week, Lorraine drove and parked outside with the engine running as usual. I carried Lily inside. After the nurse finished the shots and Lily stopped crying, I asked to use the restroom. The receptionist pointed down the hall. I walked past the restroom to the alcove by the back office where a phone sat on the counter next to a fax machine and a jar of lollipops. I dialed the Virginia Family Violence Hotline. The call lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds. A woman named a woman whose name I didn't catch, gave me a number for Margaret Hale, a domestic violence attorney who handled pro bono cases through a legal aid clinic in Harrisonburg. I said the number back to her twice. I hung up. I memorized it on the walk back to the exam room. I picked up Lily, the nurse, and walked to Elrain's car. "She's healthy," I said, buckling Lily in growing perfectly. Lorraine smiled. "Good, I was worried. You know, with everything going on with you." I smiled back. It was the most honest smile I'd worn in months. Over the next 2 weeks, I made 4 phone calls to Margaret Hale. The first was from the pediatrician's office during a follow-up weigh-in. The second was from the Piggly Wiggly, where Lorraine allowed supervised grocery trips with Belle. I told Belle I needed the restroom and used the store's courtesy phone by the deli counter. The third and fourth were from Mrs. Fielding's house next door. I walked over twice with Lily on my hip, told Lorraine I was borrowing eggs. Mrs. Fielding was 73.5 deaf and happy for the company. She let me use her kitchen phone while she held Lily and sang hymns off-key in the living room. Margaret listened the way nurses listen during intake without interrupting, without judging, writing everything down. I read her my entries over the phone. Date, time, subjective, objective, assessment, 47 entries. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is the most organized, coercive control documentation I've ever received from a client. You wrote it like medical records." I said, "I am medical records." Margaret outlined the plan. First, I needed to be physically out of the house before we filed anything. If I filed while still living under Lorraine's roof, retaliation was immediate, and I'd lose access to Lily. Second, once out, we file for an emergency protective order citing a pattern of coercive control, isolation from transportation, employment, finances, medical gaslighting, electronic surveillance. Third, simultaneously, we petition for temporary sole custody. The clinical log would be the centerpiece. Then Margaret said the thing that put the clock on everything. "The petition Elraine has. If she files it before you move, you'll be the one defending instead of acting. We need to move within the week." Lorraine noticed she had spent 6 months watching a woman fold inward. And now that woman was standing straighter and sleeping through the night and looking at her across the kitchen table with a calm that hadn't been there before. "You seem different, Donna." she said on a Tuesday morning, pouring coffee she hadn't offered me in weeks. Almost cheerful, I said. Lily slept well. Lorraine studied me. Then she tightened. No more solo grocery trips. Belle would accompany me and stay within arm's reach. She checked the desk drawer. Everything was in its place. I had been meticulous. She called Dr. Mercer to schedule a follow-up home visit. Belle reported to Elraine that evening at dinner. She went to Mrs. Fielding's for 20 minutes on Tuesday just for eggs. Lorraine turned to me. Mrs. Fielding called to check on you. That's the second person this month who mentioned you seemed off. She set down her fork. Maybe it's time we talked to a professional, Donna. A real one for your own good. Anthony nodded. Mom's right. We just want what's best. I chewed. I swallowed. I set my napkin on my lap. I appreciate the concern. I said neutral, measured, the voice I used when a patient was escalating and the charge nurse hadn't arrived yet. That night, Lily was asleep and Anthony was in the shower and I was in the hallway outside the study. Through the closed door, I heard Lorraine on the phone. Her voice was low, but the floor vent carried it. I think we should file that petition this week before she does something brash. I stood in the dark hallway with my hand on the wall and my heart in my throat. The clock Margaret had warned me about wasn't ticking anymore. It was ringing. The next morning, I made a decision. I woke before anyone else. I nursed Lily in the gray light. I dressed her in a warm onesie and packed a small bag, diapers, formula, a change of clothes, the spiral notebook wrapped in a plastic bag, and tucked everything under the blanket in the stroller by the door. Anthony came downstairs at 7. He ate cereal standing up at the counter. Lorraine came down at 7:30, already dressed, already alert, already scanning. I waited until 8. I picked up Lily, settled her on my hip, and walked toward the front door. Anthony was in the kitchen doorway. Where are you going? Taking Lily for a walk. Mom said you should stay inside today. Dr. Mercer's coming this afternoon. I shifted Lily to my other hip. I'll be back before then. I stepped toward the door. Anthony moved into the frame, not casually, deliberately. His shoulder filled the gap between the wall and the hinge. I tried to step around him. He grabbed my arm hard. His fingers wrapped above my elbow and pulled downward. My foot caught the edge of the door frame. My knee hit the wood, a sharp crack of bone against oak, and I went down on one side, turning my body to keep Lily off the floor. Pain bloomed from my kneecap up through my thigh. Lily screamed. I stood up. Anthony released my arm. He looked at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. I didn't mean, Hess said. I didn't wait for the rest of the sentence. I scooped Lily up, grabbed the stroller bag, and pushed past him through the door. He didn't follow. I looked back once from the gravel driveway. He was standing in the doorway, staring at his open palm. Route 11 ran north-south through the valley. 2 lanes, no sidewalk, gravel shoulders that caught the morning dew. July heat had come early that year, and by 8:15 the asphalt was already radiating. I limped. My right knee was swelling under the skin, hot to the touch. The kind of joint fusion I'd documented on intake forms 100 times. Lily sat on my left hip, quiet now, her fist wrapped around my collar. I headed south toward town because town was 3M and Dad was 12. I couldn't walk 12M with a baby and a bad knee. I could maybe walk 3. The gravel crunched under my sandals with every step. Tiny, sharp sounds like something small breaking over and over. I had been walking for about 20 minutes when I heard the engine, a blue Ford F-150, 10 years old, a dent in the right fender from the time Tyler backed into a mailbox in the Walmart parking lot. I knew that truck the way I knew my own heartbeat. It slowed, pulled alongside me. The passenger window rolled down. Dad looked at me. He looked at Lily. He looked at my knee, swollen to twice its normal size above the strap of my sandal. His jaw tightened. The muscle in his cheek flexed the way it had when he stood at Mom's casket and promised himself he wouldn't cry in front of us. Donable, where's your car? My mother-in-law took it, I said I should be grateful they let me live there. Dad was quiet, engine idling. 1 hand on the wheel, 1 on the gear shift. 3 seconds, 4, get in. A pause, this ends tonight. He said it the way he used to say, lights out. When I was 9. Calm, final, non-negotiable, I opened the passenger door. The car seat was still in the back. He'd kept it there since Lily was born, tucked behind the driver's seat just in case. I buckled Lily in. I got in. I closed the door. He drove. He didn't say anything for the first 5 minutes. Then tell me everything, so I did. Dad's kitchen table was pine, scarred from 30 years of dinner plates and homework binders and my mother's sewing machine. I sat in my old chair, the one closest to the window, and I told him everything. 6 months of missing keys and deleted numbers and supervised grocery trips and tracking apps and a family doctor who wrote letters he wasn't qualified to write. Dad listened the way he listened when someone came into the sheriff's office with a report. Hands folded, eyes steady. He asked 2 questions. Did he hit you? He grabbed my arm. I fell. Is Lily safe right now? She's in your living room, Dad. She's safe. He called Margaret Hale that evening. Turned out he already had her number. He'd looked it up through his law enforcement contacts 3 weeks earlier after Lorraine had intercepted his Sunday calls for the 4th month straight and turned him away at the door twice when he drove over unannounced. 30 years in law enforcement had taught him what isolation looked like. He'd been waiting for me to ask. Margaret drove to Dad's house at 7:00. She was 52, gray streak in her hair, reading glasses on a chain briefcase that had seen 1,000 intake forms. I handed her my spiral notebook. 52 entries now, the last 5 added in the final 2 weeks covering the tracking app, the hotline call, Lorraine's confrontation at this staircase, grip on my arm, and the walk down Route 11. She read it the way I read vitals, carefully, completely, without looking away. She finished and closed the cover. We filed tomorrow morning emergency protective order based on the coercive control pattern. Simultaneously, a petition for temporary sole custody. Your documentation is the centerpiece. She looked at my knee. Get that photograph tonight. Ice it, but don't let the swelling go down completely before the hearing. I nodded. Margaretta and to Dad. The hearing will be at the Shenandoah County Courthouse. Judge Carson's docket 10 a.m., Dad. I'll watch Lily. Margaret looked at me. When you testify, speak the way you document. Calm, specific, clinical. I said, I've been doing that for 5 months. She said, I know, that's why we're going to win. That evening, the landline rang at Dad's house. Dad answered, Annie's voice tight and high. Is Donna there? Is Lily there? Dad, they're safe. The baby's safe. If you need to communicate, you can talk to her lawyer. A scuffle on the other end. Then Lorraine loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen doorway. Ray Caldwell, you have no right. She is my son's wife. That is my granddaughter. You bring them back right now or I will call the police. Dad leaned against the wall, phone to his ear. He was quiet for 3 beats. Then Lorraine, I've known you 20 years. This is the last time I'm going to be polite about it. He hung up. The phone rang again. He unplugged it. What happened in Lorraine's house that night, I learned later during Anthony's deposition. Anthony sat on the couch and stared at the floor. Belle stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, calculating whether this was bad for her. Lorraine paced the kitchen. Her heels clicked on the linoleum, the same tempo as her cleaning, tight and controlled. Then she stopped. She sank into the chair at the head of the table, the chair she always sat in, the chair nobody else was allowed to use. Her voice dropped to something I'd never heard described in 6 months of living under her roof. I can't lose another one, Anthony, she said. I can't. For one breath, she wasn't the woman who confiscated my keys and called my employer and built a custody petition behind my back. She was the woman Gerald Roberts had walked out on 21 years ago, still standing at the same door, still waiting for it to close again. Then Lorraine straightened. She picked up her phone. She dialed Harrovan Settle. File the petition, she said. Tonight. I knew Lorraine had filed her petition that night. Margaret called me at Dad's house an hour later and told me, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the floor shift under me. But here's what I've learned from being a nurse. The first person to the chart doesn't win. The person with the accurate chart wins. If you've ever had to fight for something that should have been yours all along, keep watching. I put on scrubs the next morning. Not because I was going to work, because scrubs are my uniform. And a uniform tells you who you are when the rest of the world is trying to tell you something different. Navy blue top, drawstring pants, white sneakers. Dad made coffee and scrambled eggs. Lily sat in a high chair Dad had borrowed from the neighbor overnight. Margaret arrived at 8:15 with a binder she'd assembled from my notebook entries, printed, tabulated, indexed with colored tabs. My photographs from Lorraine's desk were printed on glossy paper. The custody petition, the car title, Dr. Mercer's letter. Judge Carson's docket, Margaret said. 10:00 a.m. both petitions will be heard together. Lorraine's and yours, same hearing, I nodded. Who's representing her? Douglas Harrove. He handles Lorraine's real estate and estate planning. Family law isn't his primary area. Margaret didn't smile, but her eyes did. We drove to the Shenandoah County Courthouse in Margaret's Honda. Dad stayed behind with Lily. I walked through the metal detector in scrubs and sneakers while a bailiff checked my binder. The courtroom was small, 20 seats in the gallery, fluorescent lights, a water stain on the ceiling tile above the judge's bench. Lorraine was already there. She wore a charcoal blazer and pearl earrings. Her hair was done. Her posture was perfect. Anthony sat beside her in a sport coat I'd never seen. Belle was in the row behind, phone in her lap. Douglas Harrove, silver hair, navy suit, monogrammed cufflinks, shuffled papers at the petitioner's table. I sat down at the respondent's table next to Margaret. I set the binder on the table. I folded my hands. I walked into that courtroom in scrubs and sneakers. Lorraine was in pearls, but I had something she didn't. 52 pages of the truth, dated and signed. Judge William Carson entered at 10:03. Gray beard, reading glasses, a voice that sounded like gravel being rad. He announced both petitions would be heard consecutively. Lorraine's first as petitioner, then mine. Douglas Hargrove stood and presented Lorraine's case. He was competent, professional, and working from a playbook that assumed no one would check the footnotes. Your Honor, my client is a concerned grandmother seeking emergency custody of her infant granddaughter. Child's mother has exhibited troubling behavior, social withdrawal, refusal of medical evaluation, resistance to family support. Dr. Gregory Mercer, the family's physician, has provided a professional assessment documenting his concerns. Harrove submitted Dr. Mercer's letter. He submitted Belle's photographs, the ones of me with messy hair and tired eyes. He submitted written statements from 2 church acquaintances who described me as withdrawn and not herself. Then Lorraine took the stand. She was magnificent. She cried at the right moments. She paused at the right moments. She said, Your Honor, with the exact weight of someone who has practiced deference, I love my granddaughter more than anything in this world. She said, I just want to make sure she's safe. Her mother, Donna, is a sweet girl, but she hasn't been well. We've tried to help. We've tried everything, but she refuses, and I'm terrified that if we don't act, something terrible will happen to that baby. The gallery murmured. Pastor Jim Whitfield, sitting in the 3rd row, nodded. Judge Carson's face was a wall. He wrote something on a yellow legal pad. He looked up, Respondent's Counsel. Margaret stood. She buttoned her jacket. She looked at me and she said, M. Roswell, your witness. I stood. I smoothed the front of my scrubs the way I smoothed them before entering a patient's room. A habit, a ritual, a way of saying, I am ready to do my job. I picked up the binder. I walked to the witness stand. I sat. I placed the binder on the rail in front of me and opened it to the first tab. Margaret approached. Miss Roswell, can you tell the court about the conditions you experienced in the Roberts household over the past 6 months? I looked at the courtroom. Lorraine was watching me the way she watched me in the kitchen, appraising, calculating, waiting for the fracture. Anthony was staring at the table. Belle was typing on her phone. Pastor Jim was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Judge Carson's pen was poised. I thought of Dad's words the night before on the porch after Margaret had left. You've been documenting this for 5 months. You know this case better than anyone in that room. I thought of Lorraine in the kitchen in April, her hand on my wrist. You should be grateful we welcome you here. I thought of Anthony in the doorway, his hand on my arm, the crack of my knee against the wood. I thought of Route 11, the gravel biting through my sandals, Lily's fist around my collar, and I thought of the spiral notebook wrapped in plastic inside a box of Maxipads under a bathroom sink in a house I would never sleep in again. I opened my mouth. I spoke, and I spoke the way I charted. Date, time, observation, assessment, no tears, no tremor, just the truth, organized the way I'd been trained to organize it. Entry 1, dated April 14th. Subjective, Lorraine Roberts stated, quote, "You should be grateful we let you live here." End quote. During our first family dinner at her home, objective. Within 2 weeks of cohabitation, my vehicle keys were confiscated from the common area. Mrs. Roberts stated they were moved for safekeeping. The keys were never returned. My car title, registered in my legal name, was removed from my possession and stored in a locked desk drawer in Mrs. Roberts's study. Assessment isolation from independent transportation. Margaret stood beside me guiding the entries. I read them without rushing. I paused between entries the way I paused between vitals, letting the data settle before moving to the next measurement. Entry 12, dated August 29th. Subjective. Bell installed a GPS tracking application on my mobile device without my knowledge or consent. Objective. Battery drain pattern consistent with continuous background location services application not present in my download history. Assessment electronic surveillance by a household member. Judge Carson's pen was moving. Lorraine's attorney was flipping through papers looking for something to object to. There was nothing to object to. These were dates and observations, not opinions. Entry 31, dated March 6th. Subjective. Located unsigned petition for emergency temporary custody in L. Roberts's locked desk drawer. Document prepared by Harrove and settled dated February 22nd. Grounds cited postpartum psychosis. Objective. Diagnosis of postpartum psychosis requires evaluation by a licensed psychiatrist or psychologist. The supporting letter was authored by Dr. Gregory Mercer, a family physician. Dr. Mercer holds no psychiatric specialty and is not credentialed to render this diagnosis assessment. The custody petition is supported by a diagnostic claim from an unqualified provider. I heard a sound from the gallery. Pastor Jim's chair creaked. I looked up. His expression had changed. He wasn't nodding anymore. Margaret handed me the printed photograph of the custody petition beside my car title, both from Lorraine's drawer. This is the petition Mrs. Roberts prepared to take custody of my daughter, and this is my car title in my name that she told me was at the DMV. The courtroom was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then Lorraine stood. Douglas Harrove reached for her arm. She shrugged him off the way she shrugged off anything that interfered with her control. "That is a lie," she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. She broke into my desk. She had no right to go through my private belongings. Judge Carson set his pen down. "Mrs. Roberts, you will. I raised that boy." Lorraine pointed at Anthony, who was shrinking into his sport coat. "I gave them a roof. I gave them food. I gave them everything. And this is how she repays me, by sneaking around and Mrs. Roberts." Judge Carson's voice was the sound of a door being shut. "Sit down or I will have you removed." The baif in the corner shifted his weight. Lorena trembled. Her hands were clenched at her sides. I could see the tendons in her wrists, white ridges under skin that smelled, I realized, even from 5T away like bleach. She had scrubbed her hands that morning. The same ritual, the same attempt to control every surface. But she couldn't control this one. "She's sick," Lorraine said, her voice dropping to a ragged whisper. "Can't you see that? She's manipulating every single one of you." She sat down. Hargrove whispered something in her ear. She shook her head. In the gallery, Pastor Jim Whitfield sat back in his seat. His hands were no longer clasped in support. They were flat on his knees, open, uncertain. I sat on the witness stand with my binder closed on the rail. My hands were folded. My breathing was even. I waited. The contrast was physical, visible, and total. Lorraine was shaking. I was still. The power had inverted. Margaret stood for closing argument. She was brief. Your Honor, Ms. Roswell has presented 52 documented incidents off-cursive control spanning 6 months. The pattern includes confiscation of transportation, termination of employment without the respondent's consent, financial restriction, electronic surveillance, social isolation, and medical gaslighting by an unqualified provider. The petitioner's custody filing relies on a diagnostic assessment authored by a family physician who lacks the credentials to render a psychiatric diagnosis. Furthermore, the physical escalation documented in Ms. Roswell's most recent entry and visible in her knee injury today meets the threshold for an emergency protective order under Virginia Code Section 16.12791. Judge Carson read his notes for 90 seconds. The courtroom waited. Then he ruled. First, Lorraine Roberts's petition for emergency custody denied. Grounds insufficient. The court finds no credible medical evidence supporting the claim of postpartum psychosis. Dr. Mercer's letter does not meet the diagnostic standard required for an emergency custody determination. Second, Donna Roswell's petition for an emergency protective order. Granted, the order named Anthony Roberts for physical contact and Lorraine Roberts for harassment and restricted contact. Duration 15 days with a hearing scheduled for extension. Third, temporary sole legal and physical custody of Lily Marie Roberts granted to Donna Elizabeth Roswell, pending a full custody hearing within 30 days. Fourth, the vehicle titled in Donna Roswell's name was to be returned to her possession within 48 hours. I exhaled, my lungs filled with courthouse air, old carpet and copier toner, and the faint staleness of a room where people's lives changed on paper. I closed my binder. I stood. On the way out, Margaret walked beside me past Lorraine's table. Margaret paused just long enough to say quietly, "Mrs. Roberts, you should be grateful she's letting you see her at all." Lorraine said nothing. Her hands were flat on the table. The bleach couldn't help her here. In the hallway, Anthony caught me before I reached the exit. He stepped into my path the way he had stepped into the doorframe that morning, but this time he stopped 2 feet away, his hands at his sides, palms open. "Donna," he said. His voice was thin. "Please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Mom said, I thought we were." I looked at him. He was 33 years old, standing in a courthouse hallway in a borrowed sport coat. And he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had let someone else do his thinking for so long he'd forgotten, had a mind of his own. "Your mother raised you to be afraid of a woman with a car key." "Anthony," I said, "I'm going to raise Lily to never be afraid of anything." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I walked past him, through the metal detector, through the glass doors, into the parking lot where the July sun hit the asphalt and the air tasted like hot pavement and freedom. Belle was leaning against Lorraine's car, phone in hand, thumbs frozen over the screen. For the first time in 6 months, she had nothing to report. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say that a courtroom hadn't already said better. Dad was sitting on the bench outside the courthouse entrance with Lily on his lap, feeding her a bottle he'd warmed in the truck's cup holder. He saw my face. He didn't ask, he just nodded. The single slow nod he'd given me at my nursing school graduation and at Mom's funeral and at the altar on my wedding day. The nod that meant, "I see you, I'm proud." I picked up Lily. "Hey, baby girl, Mama's here." Pastor Jim appeared at the courthouse doors behind me. His face was drawn. "Donna, I didn't know. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I shifted Lily to my hip. "You believed what you saw, Pastor. Most people do." He started to say something else. I was already walking to Margaret's car. Dad followed with the diaper bag. We drove north on Route 11, the same road I'd limped down 26 hours ago. The asphalt looked the same. The gravel shoulders looked the same. The valley stretched green and wide on both sides. But I was sitting in a car with a seat belt across my chest and my daughter behind me and a court order in a binder on my lap, and I was choosing every mile. 2 weeks later, Lily and I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on Cedar Street, 4 miles from Dad's house. The landlord was a retired school teacher named Mrs. Gaines, who accepted the first month's rent and said, The porch gets good morning light. I bought a key hook at the hardware store, the same store where I'd met Anthony 4 years earlier. A simple brass hook, no rooster, no ornament, just a hook and 2 screws. I hung it by the front door on the first night. I put my car key on it. The key Elraine had kept in her purse for 6 months. The car had been returned to Dad's driveway 46 hours after the ruling, dropped off by Anthony without a word. It still smelled like Lorraine's air freshener. I drove it home with the windows down. Over the following weeks, the legal machinery continued. Margaret filed for divorce on my behalf through a domestic violence legal aid grant. The emergency protective order was extended to a full protective order. 2 years, no contact from Anthony or Lorraine. Lorraine's custody petition was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could not refile on the same grounds. I submitted a formal complaint against Dr. Mercer through the Virginia Board of Medicine for providing a diagnostic level assessment outside his scope off practice. He received a letter of formal reprimand 4 months later. Belle was named in the protective order for her role in the electronic surveillance. Her tracking app activity was entered as evidence. She moved out of Elraine's house in August. Whether by choice or by Lorraine's shame, I never learned. She found a job at a garden center in Strawberg. Anthony pleaded no contest to simple assault, a misdemeanor, 30 hours of community service and court-ordered anger management. The divorce was finalized in December. I returned to work at Shenandoah Valley Community Hospital. My supervisor, Nancy, met me at the nurse's station on my first day back. "We held your position," she said. "Lorraine called and said you were on medical leave. We couldn't reach you to verify. Your phone was disconnected. Your emails bounced, so we flagged it as suspicious and kept the slot open. I started seeing a therapist in October. My choice on my schedule at a practice I drove myself to, not because Lauren was right about me, because she was wrong. And I needed someone qualified to help me understand how a competent, organized, educated woman could spend 6 months under a roof that was shrinking around her and still believe she could fix it from the inside. The answer my therapist said was that I could. I just needed a different set of tools. Pastor Jim organized a domestic violence awareness session at the community church that fall. He didn't mention Lorraine's name. He didn't need to. Here's what I know now. Gratitude is real, but gratitude is not a leash. No one gets to tell you to be grateful for the roof they're using to trap you. Your car keys belong to you. Your phone belongs to you. Your daughter belongs with you. And the door, the one they lock from the outside, has always opened from your side. You just need to decide to push. That's my story. 6 months of bleach and locked drawers, 1 road, 1 notebook, and a dad who showed up at the right moment. Not to save me, but torment me I could save myself. If this story reminded you to trust what your gut is telling you, do it today. And if you know someone living in a house that doesn't feel like home, share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Last night, Lily and I walked up our own driveway. The gravel crunched under my shoes, not under my bare feet. Under my shoes, and I chose every step.